Welcome to the 5 o'clock show. It's time for Common Sense. Now, it's Katz and Cosby with John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby, standing for truth, justice, and the American way, bringing common sense to the world. Now, here's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby.
Memory all alone in the moonlight.
Well, 13 days to the election, Rita.
13 days and memories, because McDonald's is saying, John, on Kamala Harris, that they're happy she had fond memories, but they still can't find any record of her working there years ago, Judge Weinberg. What do you make of that?
She has a distant relationship to the truth. That's what I make out of it.
Oh, what do you think, Craig Eaton?
I think it's hysterical. I think she's taking a page out of President Biden's book. We used to say all the things that no one could confirm.
Now, let me say something you just said to me, Rita, that the Georgia Secretary of State
said 70% of the votes in Georgia will be cast prior to Election Day.
Wow.
That is a big number.
That's a big number, yeah.
And also, later on in the show, you guys, we're going to be talking to John Fund, because it's interesting. Right now, this is the first time in modern history, and he was telling me before the show, so we'll see if he talks about it on the show, that all 7 battleground states are literally within a percentage point, that it is that close, and that's, of course, within the margin of error. That's extraordinary, John. I mean, that is neck and neck.
It's a toss-up. It's a toss-up right now, 2 weeks out.
Yeah, I can't believe it. It's literally 2 weeks from today.
Yes.
And I have never seen it where it is so neck and neck. And also, as you talked about, Craig, in the early voting, I was seeing also in Georgia, you guys, 1.5 million already in Georgia early voting, John. That is a historic fast pace.
18 million voters have voted already.
Wow.
Around the country. That's
Wow.
historic. That's got to be historic.
That is, I can't wait to ask John Fund where he thinks the loopholes are, because he knows the states where, it's early voting, where the stamps have to be in, where you have to get them in. And then there's a couple states that still have some iffy ones, John.
Now I understand Maria Shriver interviewed Kamala in a town hall meeting yesterday.
Yeah,
Tell us what happened.
Yeah, this is interesting. Kamala's at a town hall. Maria Shriver's the host. And a couple people were shouting out saying, wait, I have a question for Kamala Harris. And Maria Shriver literally said, I'm sorry, we have some predetermined questions. You're not among the, quote, predetermined
And Kamala has some
questions.
predetermined answers to those predetermined questions.
So in other words, the questions that she practiced on, those are the only ones she's going to answer?
Of course.
Those are just
Of
like
course.
the debate.
That's right. But the
It's
good
not
news is
funny.
CBS will work with the
It's
script.
not funny.
It is. It's scary.
I can't believe how people can vote for her.
It is astounding, John.
How is she gonna meet with Putin?
Absolutely, John. If she can't handle, like you just said, questions from random people, and you would think at a town hall, most of them are probably even pro Kamala Harris. If she can't handle that, John, you're right. It is a scary premise when the world is on fire. And later on, John, we're going to be talking with Gordon Chang today about what's really scary. 11,000 North Korean troops helping Russia now to go against Ukraine. I mean, this is scary stuff. You often say,
Now,
John, about World War III.
The other scary thing is, and I can't believe they did it, they have, what's the name of the agent that's still at the Pentagon, that's a Iranian agent, and still has the security clearance.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Who is running our government?
That's incredible. And we're going to be talking with Professor Dershowitz about
a whole
this.
host of people
I'll
in
tell
very
you.
sensitive positions.
I have the name. It's a woman here.
Yeah.
Ariana Tabatatai.
Right.
Tabatabai.
And do you know who her
looks like
father
name
was?
is.
One of the senior advisors to Iranian Ayatollahs.
Unbelievable.
Okay. She's raised in Tehran.
Yeah,
She's part of
Iranian
that whole-
born. Yeah.
And they have her in a...
And they have her in one of the most sensitive positions. And by the way, who is she? She's a creature of Kerry and of...
How about Robert O'Malley?
Right.
Right, tell everybody Robert O'Malley, because that's amazing that he was
the fact
kept
of
around.
the matter is, his clearance was revoked. He was kept out of there because he was alleged to have leaked important information to Iran, and he was the chief negotiator for Kerry of the so-called Iran nuclear deal. I mean, how bad is that?
I just want to say this to our listeners. Whom do you trust to run the government for the next 4 years.
And especially at a complicated time, John, where the world, there are so many issues. Also, we're going to be talking to Ken Cuccinelli about what's also scary, what's happening on the border, John. There are these migrant caravans that are like coming because
it's a rush to the border, Rita.
It's a rush to the border, unvetted.
But John, just to add to your question is, are we better off today? If you look at what's happening around the world, what's happening around the country, the wars and the insurrections and everything else, are we better off today than we were 4 years ago around the world and around the country? That's the question.
Would gasoline double?
I know.
And food 40% more and interest rates at the highest ever?
Who's saying yes?
And migrants
who's saying
all around,
we are better?
Migrants all around the country. I mean, we're definitely not better off than we were 4 years ago.
I said it yesterday. I'm going to say it one more time. I said it on Shit Show yesterday morning. What do you do with the political with the political appointees that give the border control orders to let everybody in, including 13,000 murderers? And my question to all our listeners, don't you think that is treason, letting murderers into our country knowingly?
Yeah, that's incredible. And you want more of that, John? I mean, that's the question. Think about what it would be like if they are in full control.
What about the leak? What about the leak of confidential, top-secret information about Israeli plans against Iran leaked out of, allegedly, the United States Department of Justice? How about that?
Well, absolutely. And by the way, we have someone to talk about that right now. We have Professor Alan Dershowitz. His book is War Against the Jews. Professor Dershowitz, it's astounding that there was a leak within the U.S. intelligence community about Israel intelligence strategies. What does that say? I mean, we use the word treasonous. I think it is.
Well, what it says, first of all, is that Israel is justified in not telling the United States what its secrets are and who it intends to attack and when it intends to attack. I mean, the reason that the devices work, the cell phones worked and blowing them up, the United States wasn't told about it until it was about to happen. The same thing with Nasrallah. And I think as a result of this, you're going to see even worse communications between Israel and the United States, and that doesn't serve the interests of any country. Look, we know that there are people within the government who support Iran. They range from probably the woman that you mentioned, I don't really know her, but I've read about her, to Malley, who clearly supportive of Iran, to my old friend John Kerry, who I don't trust on this issue. And when you think about the double standard, after Pollard was arrested and found to be an Israeli spy, the State Department and others started to fire people who had been born in Israel. Just because they were born in Israel, because they spoke Hebrew, they went out of their way to make sure there was no double standard or dual loyalty. But now they seem to have lots of people in positions of great authority that at least can be suspected of dual loyalties and maybe even greater loyalties to America's enemies. Remember, this hurts America greatly as well, not only Israel, and it hurts relationships between the two countries. You think the FBI is going to find out who did it? Now, there is already some suspicion with names of people, but remember, the government never found out who leaked the Supreme Court decision in the case overruling Roe versus Wade. You don't solve crimes unless you want to solve them. And I worry that the FBI is going to have a hand tied behind its back when it comes to discovering who actually leaked the material, because whether you call it treason or anything else, it's a clear violation of law to leak classified information that you were given on a classified basis.
Absolutely. And sadly, it looks like there could be a number of people. I mean, if you look at the background of some of these people, it could be a number of potential leakers, Professor Alan Dershowitz. Judge Weinberg.
And Alan, Malley was rewarded for all his great efforts by a professorship, I think it was at Princeton.
Well, of course, that always happens. That happened all over the world. Look, after Kathy Boudin was convicted of murdering policemen in Rockland County, and she served her time, and I was glad she got out, and I actually consulted with her father on it. And Columbia makes her a professor. Unbelievable. Gives her a teaching job. Can you imagine if somebody had been convicted of being a Klansman and killing civil rights workers and then served their time? You think Columbia would have ever hired somebody like that? Yeah. So we see double standards all over the place. Columbia has now banned a pro-Israel professor from campus. University of Pennsylvania is going after a conservative professor, but not after people who call for genocide. And, of course, Kamala Harris, responding to somebody yelling that Israel is committing genocide, basically justifies it instead of saying what she should say. Look, he has the right to spew this nonsense, these blood libels, these terrible things. He has the right to say it under the First Amendment. But I certainly think he's dead wrong for saying it. That's what she should have said. Instead, she said, well, he's right about that. He has a point. And everybody in this administration has said the same thing. Waltz has said that. We know that Biden has said that. We know that Kamala Harris. None of them have been willing to condemn the substance of what these bigots have been saying about, genocide and ethnic cleansing and all of those things, all of which are false. And all the spokespeople in this administration have refused to condemn it because they don't want to lose the left-wing radical student protest to vote.
It's amazing because I saw that moment, Professor Dershowitz, what you're talking about, where she says, oh, yeah, what the protesters talking about, it's real. Yeah, there is. Yeah, it's real. Right. I mean, where are the like pounding of Jewish leaders, saying this is unacceptable? I mean, it is shocking to see someone who's running for U.S. president, not stalwart supporting Israel and saying, oh, it's real. It scares me. To John's point, what's going to happen if these people are in full control of policy?
It scares me, too. And I think we've seen a failure of Jewish leadership since October 7th. We're seeing a repetition of what happened in the United States in the early 1930s. We're seeing it by Jewish leaders, by some rabbis, and others who are more interested in having an influence in getting Democrats elected than in standing up for Israel. They don't want to attack the administration now before the election. Maybe after the election is over, whichever way it goes, they'll do it. But they don't want to be perceived as having influenced the election against the person who may become the next president of the United States. So there's a lot of cowardice. There's a lot of calculation. It's all wrong. You have to stand up for principle. That's why I have said publicly, I find it very difficult to consider casting a vote for somebody who said it's real when a discussion about genocide in Gaza. It's not real. It's made up. It's fake. It's not even close to the truth. Israel has killed fewer Palestinians than any country in history faced with comparable threats and engaged in comparable wars. The numbers are much lower than are reported in the media. By the way, do you see what the Wall Street Journal reported yesterday? That they got some Sinwar messages, and Sinwar basically said, we want Israel to kill more Gazans. We want more Palestinians to die. That will hurt Israel. Let's encourage Israel to kill more Gazans. So it's Sinwar who wants Gazans to die.
They don't care about life.
Well, they really are a death cult.
Love death.
They are a death cult.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Sinwar wanted.
I was going to wonder where the Jewish vote's going to go this time, because I'm sitting here looking as we're talking.
The Hispanic vote was up significantly this morning.
Yeah, for Trump. Yeah, for Trump. Yeah. What do you think is going to happen with the Jewish vote as we're talking? I mean, if you're somebody who cares about Israel, how could you say I'm going to support what we're talking about?
And I can tell you, everybody in my family is going to vote for Harris, even though they're very strongly supportive of Israel. They, believe in the Democratic Party the way some people believe in religion. I am doubtful myself, but I stand alone among my friends and family. I think there are going to be a lot of Jews.
Rabbi Potashnik was talking to me. He thinks only 20% of the Jewish vote is going to go to Trump.
I think it'll be as many as 30%, but it won't be more than that, and it should be higher than that. But Jews are not single-issue voters any more than blacks are or gays are. I wish Jews would vote more in the interests of Israel. The great Rabbi Hillel said, "Emein ani li mili," if I'm not for myself,
Professor,
who is for me?
It's not only Israel. The problems in Ukraine, the problems in the Red Sea, the problems in the Suez, the problems in the Far East with China and Russia practicing with 400 ships.
Mm-hmm. That's why the numbers will go up from mid-20s probably to 30, but it's unlikely to go higher than that. There may be some secret votes. There may be some people. I know some people who've said, I'll never admit I voted for Trump because my family would never speak to me, but once I'm in that room, I will vote for Trump. So there'll be some of that. And there's probably a lot of that around the country, by the way, people who are embarrassed about saying they're going to vote for Trump, and that may help Trump win the election.
Last question.
You know what, Professor? You said it's not just a single issue, but this is a major issue.
Of course.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
they
really need to focus on what's going on here and look at the gravity of this issue.
And the more orthodox a person is, the more connected they are to the traditions of the religion, the more likely they are to be for Trump. And the closer they are to reform, the less likely. So, you know, it's the Jewish community is a very diverse community, but I hope they vote the interests of
the world,
the interests of the world, because
the interests of the world. Yeah, I agree.
Professor Dershowitz, we love you. Thank you so much, and we hope the world survives. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. And joining us now is Judge Andrew Napolitano. Lots of stuff on the political front.
The judge hates Trump.
Oh, stop, John.
How are you? I'm going to ask you straight out. How are you going to vote?
I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to vote, but
You're whispering in my ear.
The man interviewed me twice for the Supreme Court. So how do you think I'm going to vote?
Well, okay. Well, that sort of says it all there. We're talking about obviously the lawfare also against Trump, Judge Napolitano. I got to get to first the Nathan Wade stuff. This is the guy. He was the prosecutor in the Fani Willis case. This is, of course, the election case, all that. It comes out. I'm sure you may have seen the big headlines. It just came out a couple hours ago that the guy who had no background, I mean, never should have been appointed, clearly because he was the lover of Fani Willis. It turns out, he admitted he went to the White House twice. He just can't recall if he met with the White House counsel, what he was doing. But he also had to say under testimony that they'd been planning this for a while, this sort of, go out and go against Trump. The fact that they were at the White House, I mean, for 2 times, which we knew, but he testified now under oath, that looks so bad. Don't you think, Judge Napolitano? I mean, clearly the fix was in.
It looks terrible. I mean, who goes to the White House and doesn't remember who they saw and what they talked about? The inference is that he was being given guidance by the White House political people about the manner of prosecuting the former president. At the time, Joe Biden, everybody believed Joe Biden would be his opponent this November. And he is he's been unable to rebut that inference. Now, that's the awful news. The other side of this is never going to come before a jury. If Trump gets elected, forget about this case. I mean, he can't legally stop it, but I don't think they'll be prosecuting him 4.5 years from now when he's out of office. If Trump loses, they'll get very aggressive. And the fact that Nathan Wade did visit the White House, I don't think a judge would allow a jury to hear that.
What do you think is going to happen with
but it's not a defense.
What do you think is going to happen with the sentencing? There's still that sentencing hanging out here in New York, which is like,
Well, everything depends on November 5th. If he loses, I think the court will sentence him to 6 months and suspend 5 of them and force him to spend a month at Rikers Island.
Oh my God!
As horrific as that is. If he wins the election, I think the sentencing will be something that is not incarceration.
Wait, I want to go back to, because our jaws all just dropped in the studio. John and I and Judge and Craig were like, what? You just said you believe, and I know, by the way, Judge, you're not alone. There are others who have said this. This is amazing, though, that if he loses, you think he might get sentenced to, a month?
Yes.
That he would have to in Rikers, the former president of the United States?
I'd like to hear what Judge Weinberg thinks, but this is the view of many of us I'm not saying this is a just thing to do. I don't think the trial was just, and I don't think the conviction was just.
Time out.
There's
Judge
no
Weinberg.
victim.
Judge Weinberg, you have the floor.
Well, I know Judge Merchan, and he's supposed to be a smart guy. So if I were Judge Merchan, Judge Napolitano, what I would do is before I did any sentencing, I'd wait to see what the Court of Appeals said on these issues. I think that they should be throwing this out. This is a case that never should have been prosecuted. They used evidence that's tainted evidence because it had to do with his official duties when he's president.
Agreed.
That's enough. That's enough to throw it out.
I agree with you. I agree with everything you're saying. I do not know him. You do. I do not know how wedded he is to the Democratic machine in Manhattan. You do. I do not know if he needs to stay wedded to that machine in order to get returned to the bench when his term is over. So you have a much better finger on the pulse of these things than I do. But just looking at this as a person very experienced in sentencing, who spent not as much time as you did, but a lot of time on the bench, I think there's going to be tremendous pressure on him to impose some incarceration time if he loses the election, as unjust as that would be. Now, if the appellate division interferes as they should, then obviously he's going to do something different.
Wow, that is an astounding statement. And you're right. I mean, a lot of people seem to think this, but this is amazing.
Smart money is you wait until the appellate courts look at it and they throw it out because it's tainted evidence. That's the smart money.
That's what the smart money would do. And I think, you know him, I think he's a smart guy. I do not share in the criticism of his demeanor on the bench. I think he's smart and patient. I would have thrown the case out as you would have, but I think he's smart and patient. He doesn't want to ruin his career over this. He wants to make his career over this.
I agree with that.
That would be grandstanding. I mean, it would be ridiculous to have a former president serve time in Rikers. I mean, that would be
absolutely
disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful.
It would be a disgrace to the country, not just to the New York system.
This is not a banana
Disgraceful.
republic.
I don't think Kamala Harris is capable of running this country. I think it would be disgraceful if she gets elected.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's another argument. That's a very solid, sound argument, but that's irrelevant to whether or not Trump is going to go to jail.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
The public has to agree with you, John, and I we'll see. There's a very good chance they will.
Yep, Judge Napolitano, thank you very much. And we have a
pleasure, guys. I did not mean to give you heartburn, John. You know I love you.
It's okay. I love you too. You know that.
All the best.
Thank you.
Got some
Breaking news, WABC.
And this just come in. Israel says it killed Hashem Safadine, who is a big Hezbollah leader. So another big kill for Israel. And also...
breaking news. McDonald's linked to E. coli outbreak at CDC says.
Should we ask Kamala what happens there? Since she has
Harry
experience.
Fleischer calls Trump's McDonald visit the best photo op in political history.
I agree. It was great.
You got three breaking news.
There, we had a lot.
All right, let's take the break, and we're coming back.
We're talking about some new big poll numbers looking good for Trump.
A common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Cats and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Cats and Cosby. The polls, wow. Well, everybody is watching them, and they are nail biters. Joining us now is the polling analyst with Quinnipiac, of course, which is one of the best ones out there, Tim Malloy. Tim, what are you seeing?
You know, you could pick all the superlatives: sprint to the finish, nail biter, barn burner. It's really coming down pretty much tied in the swing states and tied nationally. You know, we call for 4 straight days. We make these calls, call thousands of people, and they're always within 2 or 3 points of each other. So it's really amazing right now to try to cover this and figure out what's really going to happen.
Have you ever seen it like this, at least in modern times? I mean, you know, I've covered a lot of political races, but it is like, it's like 0.1 to 0.5. I mean, it really is extraordinary. And what are you seeing a trend? Because the one thing it seems to be,
right.
It seems that Trump seems to be gaining, that the momentum, even if it's incremental, seems to be in his favor.
You know what's happened is after the 2 assassination attempts, he went up and then he went down a little bit, but not down as much. Harris did better after her speech or after the debate, and then she went back down to just slightly better than where she was. So the point is, there's an ebb and flow to this thing. I think Trump right now is doing a little better than her, but you got to remember she was a vice president with 39% approval rating, really bad. To get to this point, there's some momentum going on here, which makes this tough to call.
You know, today we saw Trump in Miami, and he was at a Latino town hall, and some of the Latino numbers really are moving towards him. Also, African-American men, you see it. One of the things I'm also curious, Tim, is we were just talking with Professor Dershowitz. He was saying he thinks 20 to 30% of the Jewish vote may go for Trump. How do you see it, like, within the different groups and the constituencies which traditionally were Democratic, but it seems like Trump is making some inroads in each of those?
Well, with the Hispanic Americans, it used to be the Cubans were the most conservative, and because they were from Cuba, basically their heritage. And now more and more, and there's many different people from the South and Central America here who are Americans who may be creeping more toward the Republicans than toward the Democrats, which they did originally when they came here. Long story short, the demographic groups are shifting and moving back and forth, and it's hard to really calculate. The one thing we know about Harris is that she's very, very strong with women. With Trump, he's very, very strong with white men. There's never been a bigger disparity in that demographic, men and women, in any race. They're like 50 points divided. Men like him, women like her.
You know, it's interesting. In recent days, we've seen him do like a sort of like a guy podcast. Like he's doing a Joe Rogan later this week. He did a WWE one the other day. She's been doing a lot with like African American women. Are they trying to sort of go to their core, if you will?
Yeah, well, Obama's in Michigan. Oh, he's in Wisconsin right now.
Yep.
Michelle Obama's heading out on the road too, and Joe Rogan is the top podcast in the world, and largely male listeners and viewers. So very smart on all. They're going where they have to go, and they're going to the states where they have to go. They have to go to Pennsylvania, obviously, Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, and probably Texas and Arizona. Those are the states that are going to decide the thing. So that's where you're going to see them.
Wow, really interesting stuff. Judge Weinberg.
Tim, is there any kind of significant independent vote that's undecided at this point?
We think about 5% of the Indies are still on the fence, and that's powerful. That's a lot of people. And when you got a race that goes 2 or 3 points between the two candidates, not only that, you've got third party candidates. The Green Party candidate has 2 points when you do national polls. A couple other people have 1 point. That adds up to 5. So there are variables out there that we're not thinking or talking much about, but could swing the thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. What do you think's going to swing it for them? What are they waiting for? I mean, the candidates, it's interesting as we watch it, Tim. I mean, they're so disparate in terms of like very different views of the world and of law and order. What do you think is going to sway it in the next 2 weeks?
I don't think there's going to be any October surprises. I think we know what we know, and the base is the base for Trump, and Kamala's got who she's got, and I can't imagine there can be any more drama than we've had. So it's hit those states. I just can't envision. I don't want to envision anything horrible, but I can't envision anything politically or policy-wise. You've got war in the Middle East. You've got Ukraine. You've had assassination attempts. You've had brawling debates. What else do we need before we can decide what we're going to do?
Yeah, you're right. We'll see. Well, we got to have you back on again. You're terrific, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Anytime, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, Rita, how about the hot news of the day?
It's the top news of the day, sponsored by Goya. Here's Rita Cosby.
And as we are talking about, Election Day is literally 2 weeks away from today. Former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are hitting key swing states as the clock is ticking. Trump is scheduled to hold a rally in North Carolina this evening, and Harris is sitting down for an interview with NBC News tonight following an interview with Telemundo. Jury selection could take the rest of this week in the trial of a Marine heroic veteran accused of the deadly chokehold on the New York City subway last year. Lawyers for Daniel Penny say Jordan Neely was acting erratically when Penny placed Neely in a deadly chokehold. The Manhattan judge says that even if someone has an opinion about the case, they could still be selected as a juror as long as they keep an open mind. And those are the big stories coming up. We have Ken Cuccinelli. He is the former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, talking about some big caravans making their way right now to the U.S. border, trying to get in before Election Day.
You're commuting home with Katz and Cosby. Now, here's John Katzimatidis and Rita Cosby on 77 WABC.
And joining us now here on Katz and Cosby is the great political expert, pollster, consultant, and extraordinaire, John Fund. John, it's looking like on Election Day, we may not know who won. There are so many twists and turns to this, right? And it's 2 weeks from today.
Well, look, every election is different, but let's look at what happened in 2020. Joe Biden was not declared the winner by the Associated Press until Saturday after the election. That's 4 days. North Carolina wasn't called for 2 weeks. Arizona wasn't called for 10 days. Pennsylvania wasn't called for 6 days. So over and over again, we're seeing that these battleground states can be very, very close. Right now, as we speak, all 7 battleground states are within 1 percentage point with the 2 candidates. Less than 1 percentage point. That has never happened before in modern American politics. We're heading for a real squeaker.
Wow. Why is that, John? What do you attribute that it is so literally neck and neck?
Well, all of the fundamentals of the economy and foreign policy and basic government competence, and especially the immigration crisis, favor Trump. Biden has not been a successful president, and it is the Biden-Harris administration. However, Donald Trump's personality is a drag. He has lost some moderate Republicans. He has lost some independents. And as a result, we have a race where I think that Trump is now narrowly ahead, but it's too close to call. And frankly, the best thing he can do the next 2 weeks is not make news and not remind the people who don't like his personality what his personality sometimes can be.
We agree 100% on that. But I just don't think Kamala Harris has the ability to run a successful White House. I mean, I can't believe how, that the people not voting for Trump can believe that she's capable of having a successful White House.
Just remember, John, the easiest thing to do in an election is not to vote. 40% of people don't vote for a presidential election. So Trump doesn't have to lose those people to Kamala Harris. He just has to have them so cynical and frustrated and depressed that they don't vote. And that hurts him too. The other thing that, of course, that's important is this. I'll be honest with you. Joe Biden didn't have the wherewithal to be a president at all for a couple of years. And people were still going to vote for him. So not everybody is like you and I and Rita and everybody else. Competence may not be an issue for them. They are, tribal. This is my guy, this is my gal, and competence may not enter into their equation.
What about also early voting, John Fund? Because there have been historic numbers of early voting.
I worry about that.
Yeah, I wonder too. Exactly. How is that going to factor?
Well, early voting is less democratic this year than it was 4 years ago, partly because I think Republicans have gotten used to the idea, so they're turning up early as a matter of convenience. But I don't think that early voting is going to play a major factor. The real problem is not early voting. The real problem is mail-in voting, because early voting takes place under the supervision of a government official in an office or a school or something like that. Mail-in voting, the post office does such a bad job delivering first-class mail. In primaries this year, 2% in some states of the mail-in ballots never made it back or came back so late they couldn't be counted.
Didn't some of the states say they have to be received by Election Day?
More states are doing that than did in 2020. That's a good thing. So in other words, if you're in Pennsylvania, if there's a new rule that if your ballot isn't there by 8 p.m. on election night, it's not going to be counted. That's a good, firm rule. That encourages people to vote in person or to make sure that they don't. Let's put it this way: they put their ballot in the mail with weeks in advance, so the post office is sure to deliver it. We hope.
John, any other states that you're worried about that might not do the voting exactly the way it should be?
Well, Nevada has the worst election law in the country. The Democratic legislature there, and when they had a Democratic governor, he signed it, says that every person on the voter registration roll automatically gets a mail-in ballot, automatically, even though they don't request it. So I have witnessed in previous elections apartment building lobbies in Las Vegas, which have highly transient populations, where there are just piles of ballots on the table in the lobby. Anybody could pick them up. Anybody could send them in, and the likelihood is, since signature verification is scant, they'd probably be counted. That worries me a lot.
Yeah, wow. That is really incredible. John, keep us posted. I'm sure we're going to be talking with you now 2 weeks away till Election Day. Thank you, John, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Wow. You know what? It's interesting, John. We were just saying he has never seen it this tight in American history, where it is literally down to the wire. That's amazing. Well, joining us now, you guys, is Ken Cuccinelli, former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, also former Attorney General of Virginia. Secretary Cuccinelli, it's so great to have you here again on Katz and Cosby. Let's get first to the border, because it's an area you know well. There are these reports of a whole bunch of different migrant caravans trying to make their way in to our southern border soon, because they're worried if Trump gets in, maybe we'll finally have some border security.
The border will be closed if Trump gets in.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's the idea, right? Of course, that was the idea after 9/11. That was the idea when the Border Fences Act of 2006 was passed on an overwhelming bipartisan basis, including with votes by people like Chuck Schumer. And Trump is determined, unlike the first term, to actually do it this time. And look, let's not sugarcoat it. In the first term, he did not use the military to close the border. And in the second term, he is determined to do just that. And if he's with that kind of determination, he can do it in a matter of weeks.
You know, you look at the difference in policy, too, with Kamala Harris. I mean, she's even Tim Walz has talked about opening up the detention centers. I mean, for people listening out there, if they care about the security of this country, what do you say to them?
Well, I'm not sure there's a lot of difference between that and what they're already doing. Go ask, renters in Aurora, Colorado, and people in Springfield, Ohio, and, town after town that are being overrun with folks coming across that border illegally or being ridiculously legalized. The abuse of parole authority, for example, and with criminal consequences, with labor consequences. Rita, my favorite statistic from Trump's first term is one he didn't even know until I told him. At the end of 2019, before COVID, Donald Trump achieved the lowest poverty rate in the history of keeping that statistic in America. The lowest poverty rate in America, in the history of America. And he had spent more months below 8% black unemployment than the rest of my life combined. How did that happen? And what was the consequences? It wasn't just tax cuts and deregulation. Those were important. They got the economy moving. But the way poor people got help is that cheaters, illegal aliens, were kept out of the labor market. And so businesses had to compete for poor Americans to work in their businesses. And guess whose wages rose more as a percentage than anybody else? The poorest Americans. And that's what we should want. That's the way to raise people out of poverty, is to create the opportunities for them to do it themselves. And the Donald Trump economy of 2019 did exactly that.
And, Ken Cuccinelli, former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. Now we're seeing the opposite. I mean, now you're seeing so many different communities where they're saying, wait a minute, now the migrants actually are taking over. I mean, how do you reconcile when you see these people? Like, I look at what happened in, like, say, North Carolina, where, they were begging for $750 and they literally lost everything. And then they see migrants, like in New York City, getting put up in $350 a night hotel rooms.
Right, and then we see the poor performance in Western North Carolina when Americans actually need their government to perform. Now, let me be clear. Governor Roy Cooper is the main culprit there. He woefully underperformed the other 5 governors in response to Helene. But FEMA didn't do itself any favors out there either. But again, the states are the first responders. FEMA can't do, can only do so much. They're there to back up states. But it's a good example of why you don't spend more than you take in. It's why you balance the budget so that on those times when you really need it, it's there for Americans.
Absolutely.
Not for everybody else, for Americans.
Right. It's like, we got to take care of our own first. Everybody, we're talking to the former deputy of Homeland Security, also former Attorney General of Virginia, Judge Weinberg.
Good to talk to you again, Mr. Secretary. I'll tell you what troubles me. The United States Department of Justice is suing your state, the state of Virginia, because Governor Youngkin and the Attorney General there are cleaning up the rolls of illegal voters. How are you going to have a fair election if you have illegal voters on the rolls? And why is the Department of Justice suing Virginia when they're just doing what they're supposed to do?
Yes, and they're doing the same thing that they did in the 2020 election under a Democrat governor and the same thing they did in 2016 under a Democrat governor. And by the way, the bill that became the Virginia law they're enforcing was my bill when I was in the state Senate. You know who the governor is who signed it?
Tim Kaine. Right.
Tim Kaine.
A Democrat.
And in 2006, a liberal Democrat. And in 2006, when that bill was signed, Virginia was still required under the Voting Rights Act to get anything to do with its elections pre-cleared. The Department of Justice already approved this law in pre-clearance. Now they're suing on it. And they're suing based on Governor Youngkin's Executive Order 35, which he issued August 7th. They waited over 2 months to file suit. This is a political stunt. It's nothing more. And of all the political stunts they could pull, what they're doing is suing to keep non-citizens on the voter rolls. Seriously, this is the Department of Justice attempting to provide cannon fodder to the Harris campaign's threats to democracy malarkey, to quote the president. That's all it is.
And then we have.
Now, I will tell you, Judge. I will tell you that because of 2 Democrat senators and where we are in Virginia, the Fourth Circuit, the federal court here, folks, is the worst one in the country. So, we may have to go all the way to the Supreme Court to win it. But this is a simple case where people who are non-citizens identify themselves as non-citizens and are taken off the rolls. What's wrong with doing that?
And then we have Gavin Newsom, the California governor, but he gave an executive order that you can't ask for ID to vote. Yeah.
And, that which is insane. There are an awful lot of other things you can't do, which are pretty small and petty in California without an ID, like go to a rated R movie. And but by golly, you're not allowed to ask for one to go vote. It is an invitation to fraud. It's an open invitation to fraud. And so there will be fraud. I mean, when you design a system to allow fraud, you get more of it. Doesn't necessarily mean it'll change the outcome, but it's going to be a much uglier election in California. And if I remember correctly, there are 5 critical House seats at issue in California. It is, just because it's a blue state doesn't mean there isn't a lot at stake there.
Yeah, that's for sure. You're right. Big time. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken Cuccinelli. Great to have you. And coming up, we have Gordon Chang, John.
But some more breaking news.
Breaking news, WABC.
That E. coli linked to McDonald's, quarter pounders, 1 dead and 49 sickened. 1 dead, 49 sickened. And does it say, Rita, where it's happening?
No, I'm taking a look here because they just are getting the details.
Let's take the break.
Yeah, let's find out some details. That's really scary. And Gordon Chang after the break, too, guys.
It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC. Breaking news, WABC.
And, John, we do have an update on those deadly E. coli cases. There's one death in the state of Colorado. It's in 10 different states where people have been sickened going to McDonald's, eating quarter pounders. And let me just give you the states just so everybody knows. Colorado, Nebraska, also Utah, Wyoming, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Oregon, and Wisconsin are the states. But, of course, let's hope it gets contained very quickly because that's really dangerous stuff.
All right, let's go to Gordon Chang. He's got some hot news. Gordon, how are we doing?
I'm fine, John, and thank you so much. And on Tuesday, in other words, today, we had live fire drills by China in the Taiwan Strait, extremely provocative. And these follow last Monday's exercises around Taiwan. They were a record number of planes, and for the first time, China used the Coast Guard. Coast Guard is significant because the Coast Guard is only supposed to be used for domestic activities, and that means they're saying that Taiwan is a domestic part of China.
Wow. You know, Gordon, what about all these North Korean troops? I mean, there's reports it's 11,000, up to 11,000 North Korean troops heading to Russia to help them fight Ukraine. I mean, this is like, I hate it really, is this war expanding? I mean, this is scary.
It is expanding. There's 4 combat brigades, about 12,000 of North Korea's finest troops, special operators. And they, some of them are already there. Some of them are on the way. 6 North Koreans have already been killed in Ukraine, and probably there are more. Some people say 18. But the point is that this war is expanding because North Korea has now committed ground troops. And clearly, China is not that far behind. There are actually Chinese volunteers fighting for Russia in Ukraine. We haven't seen regular Chinese units, though, but we can't count that out. I suspect Beijing believes that it can get by with just the North Koreans, but if they can't, then this war will expand even further.
Wow. You know, what is the reaction? Have you seen?
So, the question you should be asking our listeners, do you trust Kamala Harris to handle this war?
That's a great point because it's exploding, John.
I mean, this is crazy what's going on.
It is crazy. How explain the huge difference, Gordon, obviously.
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris said she would do nothing different than Biden. Well, Biden was the one who opened the door to the invasion of Ukraine with this catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan. Biden's policies before the invasion in February 2022 obviously didn't stop Vladimir Putin. So if she's as good as her word, that means she would have adopted the same policies leading to the same disasters. So I don't think that we can trust her to rescue us from what could very well be the test case, because basically China, Russia, North Korea see this as the battle for the world. They believe that they can win everything in Ukraine, and that means we have got to have a similar response.
Wow. And as we're looking, I mean, it could actually escalate under her. I mean, I have no confidence. She's been even more vocal. Craig Eaton.
Gordon, let's not forget the Biden release of the $7 billion in the frozen Afghan funds that was given out right before the attacks.
Right. And also you have the money that was unfrozen on the September 11th, 2023 deal and the $86 billion worth of equipment that we left in Afghanistan, which will be used against us at some point. This has really been disastrous policy. And, you have President Biden just been wrong on everything. Now, we can argue about why he was wrong, but the point is this is just one catastrophe after another.
Can we afford 4 more years of this? That's really the question that our listeners really need to think of. 4 more years of this administration, which is going to be a continuation if Kamala wins.
A disaster.
It's going to be a disaster. It's just going to continue. The United States needs some strength here.
I just want to tell the stock market guys, the Dow Jones is at 43,000. If it goes forward and you have all those wars escalating, I think you're going to have it at 23,000.
Or lower. What we're talking about really is global conflict because we have China's fighting proxy wars in Europe, in Ukraine, across North Africa, and the Middle East. If you have a war in East Asia, that really looks like World War III because remember, in the 1930s, we had separate wars that merged into what we now call World War II. We're seeing the same dynamic today, guys.
Yeah, big time. And if not even, it's so scary with Biden. And believe me, he made so many mistakes. Just ask Robert Gates, the former defense secretary, who says he was always on the wrong side of history. Kamala, she doesn't even have the depth, the knowledge, Gordon. And these are very complex issues, which we're talking about, and high stakes. And let's not forget, Russia's a nuclear nation, too. This is scary stuff.
Yeah, and North Korea and China are nuclear as well. Robert Gates, in his 2014 memoir, said, and this is almost a direct quote, Joe Biden has been wrong on nearly every foreign policy and national security matter of the past 4 decades. Gates was right about that because we have seen essentially a peaceful world that Trump left to Biden, and now we're on the verge of global conflict. So whatever one can say, clearly Biden's policies have failed across the board.
Gordon, you're a smart guy. You're as smart as they come. Why doesn't the American people realize what the heck is going on?
I wish I were smart enough to answer that question, John. I think it's because we're so focused on domestic problems right now. And, most American elections are decided on the economy and things that are happening at home. This election is even more consequential because we see what's happening in our schools to our children. And that, of course, is emotional. And that, of course, focuses all our attention. Biden has done his best to try to prevent the American people from talking about foreign matters, and he's been successful in that regard.
By the way, breaking news on Fox, I'm watching it, 57% Hispanic vote, 57%.
52% to 47, which is for Kamala, but that's a big win for Trump because
47, normally the Republicans never got 47.
Exactly. That's very close for a Republican. That's incredible. It shows a lot of them are going to Trump.
Yes, and you shouldn't be surprised because Hispanics in the United States, they look at what's happening at our southern border, and they're disgusted as much as we are because they came in legally, and they don't like what they're seeing.
Yeah, including a Chinese coming in, among others. Gordon Chang, thank you. We
so
love
much,
having you on, Gordon.
Keep fighting for America, Gordon.
I will, and thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Love having you on.
What do we stand for?
Truth, justice, and the American way.
God bless America. We need God's help on this one.
We do.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Terms and conditions apply.